Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm very honored that I have the chance to start the contributions for this OFFENBURG Talks. What I want to do in the next 20 minutes is to talk about first about what is civil society, because especially when we talk about European civil societies, we can see there are a lot of different traditions, expectations, and perspectives that are bundled up in this term. And it can be very useful to arrange these impressions in a sensible manner and to agree upon what we're talking about. And second, then I want to talk about the shrinking space phenomenon, the shrinking space of civil society, because the title of this event is Shrinking Space for Youth Work. So I want to tell you a little bit more about what it's about and why do we talk also about shrinking and growing paradox. And then I want to close up with a short outlook of upcoming challenges for civil society organizations. So what does civil society mean? The term civil society is often described as a third arena besides the market and the state. And the collective actors that belonging to it are referred to as civil society organizations. And these three arenas in which the individual acts collectively have like specific tasks that they are performing for society. The state, that includes the national, the regional, and the local level, and its first task is exercising public authority. Only the state, for example, can collect taxes or can forcing you to do or to refrain from things that are required by law. The market, that includes like trade international companies as well as very small productions, is characterized by his intention to achieve profits by selling goods and services. And the civil society finally includes movements, organizations, and institutions that engage in and for the general public. And its arena is characterized by a logic of voluntarism, giving empathy, time, ideas, and assets. There's a subjective interest in the common good, a primary orientation towards a predefined target, and behind it, there's a non-profit gaining logic. So this is also including refraining from distributions, profits to members or owners. The S is for the subject, which is you and me. And as you can imagine, there are a lot of different legal forms, actors, movements that create this civil society. And if you want to categorize this myth, you can do it by different aspects. For example, by function. So you can see there are a lot of service providers, for example, in the health care sector. There are those civil society organizations that are doing advocacy or watchdog function, which means they are fighting for the preservation of nature, for example, or for minority rights or consumer protection. Some civil society organizations are mainly intermediaries or are being self-help groups or just pursuing personal growth. But you can also look at the structure. You can look if they are more like spontaneous civil society movements, or are they having like a stronger structure, organizational structure. You can look if there are associations, for example, or foundations, so you can look at the legal form. And that's what the so-called third sector research is focused on. But you can also look at the mission or the field. So you can have a look if you're working in the social welfare, in the research sector, education, sports, or human and civil rights. And most of your organization, I suppose, or the organization we will talk about in the next 2 days, are probably from the field of education. But as I said on the beginning of the talk, there are a lot of different perspectives or ideas in the term of civil society. And especially when we look to civil societies in Europe, you can see there are a lot of differences. And this is because you can kind of uncover different paths of political theory or political ideas behind that term. And roughly speaking, you can differ between a liberal, a conservative, or a left concept of civil society. And without going too much into detail, one can say that the liberal, with authors of John Stuart Mill, for example, or John Locke, that puts the focus on self-organization and a sphere of action that is apart from state interfering. The conservative emphasis the aspect of social cohesion and in kind of a republican spirit in a sense of virtue of citizenship. And the left concept focus more on a stronger, have a stronger focus on political participation and action. Sometimes it comes with an anti-capitalistic spirit or approach, which you find, for example, in the thought of Jürgen Habermas. And these ideas or thoughts are also connected with a historical role of the state in the country, and that's what's actually shaping the framework for civil societies. So stronger states, like you have, for example, in the post-Soviet group, comes with a weaker civil society and less civic engagement, but also with a critical oppositional part in civil society. And in countries like Germany or Sweden that have a big welfare system, you can see civil society is often embedded in a state cooperation manner. So the German civil society, for example, has an important corporistic subsector that works closely with and is predominantly funded by the state, providing services and performing self-help. And traditionally, civil society organizations have played an essential role in the German welfare system, including providing crucial healthcare services. And you can still see this role in the welfare organizations like Arbeiterwohlfahrt or Caritas, which are huge in Germany. But today there's also an independent subsector which is funded predominantly by donors and voluntary donations of foundation grants. And this engaged in advocacy, watchdog, political education, or campaigning. And if you want to know more about the different approaches or traditions of civil society in Europe, then you could check out our latest publication, Understanding Civil Society in Europe, which you find on our homepage. So now I want to come to my next point, what is the discourse of shrinking space of civil society is about. It's the bundled up observation of attacks and attempts to restrict civil society organizations all over the globe that have framed this discourse of shrinking space of civil society. And it's not only the affected communities, but also increasingly in public and scientific research. Although most of the reports describing the shrinking space are country reports, the global nature is emphasized by most of the authors. And the restrictive measures are described as following. You have the containment of constitutionally protected rights, such as freedom of speech or freedom of assembly, but you also can observe public stigmatization of civil society organizations. You have an increasing of the online and offline surveillance, and there's also a growing control over funding for philanthropic activities, especially for international fundings and donors. And these regulations and high accountability requirements have a restrictive effect when they are used improperly against critical organizations. Or sometimes they're just causing collateral damage because they have this they put up these high bureaucratic burdens. And the corona pandemic, so it seems, have like kind of catalytic effect on these contestations. The crisis creates the peril of further anti-civil society regulations and of further freedom rights abuse. Nevertheless, besides the shrinking, we can also observe the growth of many civil societies, like empirically. And we see that it's not just the service provider subsector that is growing in most countries. You also have more minority groups and movements claiming political rights and participations in the last decades. When it comes, for example, to women's rights or LGBTQ rights. This is if you compare the situation with like 20 years ago. So the assumption of growing and shrinking on the same time seems like a paradox, and it often leads to analytical confusion. And it shows that the term of shrinking space of civil society should only be used as a critical term and not as a descriptive one. And that we should better speak instead of the contested space of civil society, because then we are aware that the space is influenced in his contingency by different socio-political development and actors, as well as what I call the zeitgeist. And these parameters must be examined and researched about. So some of the current social political developments were already named, like saying the transformation from democracy to what some people call post-democracy or new authoritarian systems. That's a good example for it. And but what we can also see is there's like an ongoing contestation in civil society itself. When these civil society actors, when some civil society actors don't recognize human or civil rights or the plurality or the principles of an open society, then a normative, meaning like a good perception of civil society, becomes obviously problematic. And these inner trends can be observed latest in the upcoming populist movements like Pegida in Germany, for example. And with the anti-corona demonstrations that began to take place here in Germany in July, you could see like a very strange mix from conspiracy theorists, right-wing extremists and esoteric groups, and civic activists found themselves in this strange situation to witness that their very own causes, like fighting for freedom of assembly or freedom of speech, were being voiced in public by assemblies they would never wish to be associated with. And we have to do more research about this trend and this sometimes called dark side of civil society. If you're interested in a closer look to the contestation, if you want to check out the quality of the frameworks of civil society on a global scale and for different countries, you should check out the Civicus monitoring reports or the Civil Society Sustainability Index. They can find like the latest incidents and cases of rights abuses. But as you can see on the map, there's like a lot of white mapping in the map below. This is because there are no reports for these countries, and this most of those countries being European countries that shows us a problem, which is like neither Civicus nor the sustainability index have a sufficient focus on stable democracies, coming from the assumption that there is no need for these observations of civil society there because they are in a good shape. And seeing that this is not necessarily true anymore, considering the right-wing shift I just mentioned, we have to work on that. And this is why Maecenata started a new research project about the European civic space, and first results will be coming at the beginning of the next year. So if you're interested in that topic, stay tuned to that. In the last minutes, I will try to round this up with the outlook of future trends in civil society with a focus on youth and digitalism. And like in many other countries, in Germany, you can see civil society is growing and changing a lot over the past 30 years. And recently becoming more digital, more diverse, more informal. And citizens' involvement and engagement have shifted from larger, established and traditional ways of organization to rather small, new movements. And so from a permanent long-term commitment to a short-term activity and more spontaneous, unorganized engagement. And I want to focus on engagement and volunteers because this is one of the main reason, or the core resource of civil society. And as we can see, like both age or youth and digitalism and civil society is connected, because young people have a different way of engaging civil society. They tend to adopt the digital changes in a creative manner and uses their way of communication also in the way they volunteer or they being politically active. And I'm sure we will hear a lot more about that in the next contributions. And civic engagement also that we can see over the last years is changing. It's becoming shorter, more issue focused, and also more diverse. And the digitalism is an important force behind this change, because digital platforms are becoming increasingly important for the engagement, because it's a huge source to collect like human power to raise money or raise awareness for issues. And so it's just the possibility to connect. But it's also useful to locate needs and the ability to immediately respond to them, as you can see, for example, in the causes for shelter for homeless people, or in catastrophes like flooding, or as you could see in the Corona crisis in the neighborhood aid, which was like in big parts organized digital. So we can also see that existing forms of engagement are not replaced by totally replaced by forms of digital engagement, but rather supplement it. And coming back to the contested civic space, we can see that this digital technology is causing like some of kind of dual use problem. On the one hand, as I said, it's the perfect base to connect humans, to collect money and awareness raising, and and to create a new and growing form for the civic engagement. But on the other hand, it also can be used for surveillance or against oppositional or critical groups. It's the place for hate speech and for stigmatization, and it has like a big social disconnecting potential. So what we definitely see is that civil society is changing, like every day. And the shrinking movements maybe in a larger historical perspective not be true for every part or every society. But what we definitely can observe is like kind of a copycat strategy from authoritarian states to arrest or restrict the critical parts or the political parts of their civil societies. And this is not so much for the service providers, though, but for the critical ones that we can see in the last decade. And I think a question for you that you are working or interested in youth work and education, which is a field that can be seen as a service provision as well as, if it comes to political education, as a like kind of political work, this maybe brings you into kind of trade-off situation. This maybe is, we can discuss this. And with all the attacks and attempts to restrict civil society all over the world, we have to be very cautious, and we have to see that the increasing attacks and on critical civil society organizations are also happening in the stable democracies here in Europe. So we have to make sure that we have enough space and scope of action and to claim a good framework for civil society from our governments. But we also see there's no such thing as a automatically good civil society. You know, means we have to take a closer look to the dark side of civil society, and we have to ask or to dare ask questions, new questions like maybe does civil society also support undemocratic behavior? And with this thoughts, I will initiate the discussion or to the next contribution, and thank you very much.